And we're going to see a great deal of this where God does not change customs. Did he change polygamy? But you know, this is a very difficult problem in the mission field. When a chief is converted and he has 10 wives, and you say, well, you may only have one. He says, well, if I must only have one, I want number 7. She's my favorite. And you say, oh no, you only get number 1. Well, that's not fair. My folks made that arrangement when I was 3 years old, and I never did really care for her much anyway. I want number 7. You say, it doesn't make any difference. You get number 1. Well, what about the other 9? Well, it's true, their lives will be miserable from here on. No one else will feel he can look after those 9. It's like sentencing them to death. But you see, never mind those 9. You've got to keep the commandments even if you destroy 9 people. It's like folk hurrying home on Friday for Sabbath sundown. Break all the rules in order to keep number 4. It doesn't make sense, does it? So, as you know, in the pages of the review, there's been a gradual unfolding of an understanding of what to do. We have had a halfway policy that if a chief is converted and he wants to join the church, until he solves the problem of his plural marriages, he may not be a member of the church, but he may be a member of the Sabbath school. Do you remember? Until he solves the problem. Now they're wondering what to do. Could he be a member of the church? But it reminds us of these old days. Did God say to Jacob, you may only have your first wife? He'd say, that's not fair, because I thought I was marrying Rachel. But the next morning, the first morning of my honeymoon, I woke up and I looked across, and there on the pillow was not the girl I loved, it was her sister, Leah. Can you imagine the predicament yourself? You wake up in the morning, the first morning of your honeymoon, and it's not the girl you thought you were marrying, it's her sister. Well, Laban said, you can have the other one too for 7 more years of labor. But then those 2 girls were not bearing children, and so he had 2 auxiliary wives. He had 4. And God didn't say, look, you live with Leah, dismiss the others. God said, I will bless you, Jacob, and your 12 sons will be the patriarchs of the 12 tribes of Israel. What do you think of a God who would do that? The same way with David and Bathsheba. You see, truly the Bible is not a code book, is it, of deeds to be done? Or we should do the very same thing. Did David have any right to Bathsheba? The first baby died. But he went on living with Bathsheba and the other wives and his harem, and he used to thank God for his harem. Right there he says, God, thank you for the wives you've given me. And God didn't say, what do you mean, thank you for the wives? You shouldn't have any of those. You should just have the first one. No, God said nothing about it. Did he tell him to give up Bathsheba? No, they had another child. Did God bless that child? Who was the next child? Solomon. Isn't that incredible? Who looks good in that story? Only God. He was very gracious to David. I don't think we would have treated them that way, would we? We would have said, send all the rest home, Bathsheba included. Maybe we never would have had Solomon in the story. But God has done it another way. Now some say, good, that's an excuse now. I can have a polygamous relationship here. No, God is saying the ideal is very clear. Remember, Jesus came along and said, now wait a minute. In the beginning it was not so. There was a man and a woman. The 2 became one, and what God has joined together, let no man put asunder. He said, that's the ideal. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Except this same theme runs all through Scripture. God looks at these customs. And if you read the whole Bible, you know he doesn't like some of them. Doesn't like them at all. Malachi says, God hates divorce, but he gave them the divorce laws as an emergency measure. And he left many customs unchanged. And isn't it impressive? Would anybody suggest Ellen White did not have a clear view of what one ought to do? Very clear. Some regard her as too clear and too forceful. And yet she could write that God did not see fit to change certain customs, not till later on. And if we admire that in God, it even affects the way we go as missionaries to the world. You know, in the old stories, missionaries would arrive in the South Pacific, and here were these natives, due to custom and the climate, they were living as Adam and Eve did. And this greatly distressed the missionaries. And so they made sure that the native people put on long, suitable garments to cover themselves, so that who would feel better? The missionaries. Now, who were they going out to serve? Themselves or these people? And so now our own church is seeking more to meet people where they are and lead them no faster than they can follow. And that's very godlike. It's very much in harmony with Scripture. It doesn't mean we're compromising the ideal, not one bit. But the greatest ideal of all is to treat people the way God does and how very patiently He has led us along.